Hello everyone, I'm Rick Michelle. This is part 2 in how I finish some kitchen cabinets, raw timber as a matter of fact. If you haven't seen my first video on the preparation of how I get to this point where we're going to start putting a finish on these, I highly recommend watching that because prep is everything and it's probably more work than actually putting the material on the cabinet doors. I'll put a link in a card above, or if you want to wait for that, I'll put a link in the description below. I want to do a dry run and show you exactly how I move these once they are painted. I use a nail and my finger. There's always a hole where the doorknobs are. So I put the nail in the hole with a little bit of pressure. It doesn't matter how I usually press down so I can pull it out. Stand up. I put my finger where the hinge is. Pick it up. Take it over to where I'm going to stack it. And I go about my next door. Now I know that one of the questions, one that I get asked a lot, what brush do you use? Well, actually, we're going to be using nylon brushes today. I'm from old school. I usually use China bristle or pure bristle. Things are changing, even hard to get those nowadays. So we're going to be using a nylon brush. These two brushes are exactly the same brand, but they're just a different size. Now they also come with those little angles on there, which those come in real handy for other jobs. For something like this, it'll work. There's no problem with it, but I would recommend using one that's got a square. Now I would use this one, but DIYs, they always use a smaller brush than what they probably should. But I'm going to use this brush to show you that it can be done. There's nothing wrong with it. Just takes a little bit longer, a few more dips. So getting down to the crux of it, I've got some cardboard that's kind of taped to the wall there. Then it's just simply because when I lean this up against, there's going to be just a little bit of paint. For a DIY, I would recommend going a little bit further to stop splatter. Also, you'll notice that everything on the floor is absolutely covered. What I'm painting on are two sticks, keeps it up off the ground. The other thing is, I've got this area right here pretty well spotless from dust, and in all honesty, it probably should be done a little bit better, but just so that you know, make sure that there's dust free. If you've got pets, I can almost guarantee you're going to get hair on your doors. So let's count to 3, muster up some courage, and get stuck into this. This is the face of the door, which is what we want to have facing us when we're actually finished. But the first thing we do is the edges. Always your edges first. Which means we're actually painting the back first. I kind of load it on there. Not worrying too much at this point in time what it looks like. And it looks terrible. The worst thing you can do now, this isn't just a clear finish. I mean, I can see through it. I can actually see the timber. But it's got a pigment in it. And because that pigment is in there, it makes it extraordinarily difficult to use. Is why I recommended make sure you've got a lot of experience using oil-based products. In particular, this is probably about as tricky as it gets. to turn it around. I'm getting too old for this stuff. To turn it around, we just have to walk it forward. It's a little bit tricky, especially with this stuff. While I've got that up, got to build up there. And then finish off with the face of the cabinet. And again, I just basically throw it on. Now you probably can't see it in the video. I've got both windows open and the front door ajar for fresh air, because this is some pretty potent stuff. It's not the worst stuff for you. It's pretty smelly. But those of you with experience, you don't need to be told that. You can see it's a lot of playing around with a really gentle touch. It really is the hardest stuff on the market to use, or in my opinion it is. And it's the same as with the stain it's the same as the stain in the polyurethane. And most painters aren't very good at it. There should be no drag marks whatsoever. No heavy spots. Okay. So just like in the dry run, oops, I've got a big fat run here, is what you're always double checking. Okay, up top again. My first coat is good and dry. I had a house to paint since I've done this, so it's good and dry. Now, for those of you that don't know, when you put a first coat of anything on timber, it's a liquid, so it kind of soaks into the surface of the timber and it swells. And because it's a material that's going to dry hard when it dries, that swelling, well, it's rough. So if I take my hand and run across there, it is just rough as guts. It feels like sandpaper. Now that's a good thing, and then we call that raising the grain. The first coat raises the grain. Because this finish has a pigment in it, and it's like the stains that are in polyurethane, you want to be careful when you're sanding on the edges in particular. So, well, that's the bottom. But you have to be fairly flat. You'll see it'll stand out instantly if you roll the edges. If you roll the edges, you're going to sand through the finish and back into raw timber. And you don't want that. Edges, they don't take a lot. Okay, so when it comes to the surface, I'm going to put some pretty good grunt. I'm going to put some pretty good pressure on that. I'm going to more or less go with the grain. And I'm pressing fairly hard there. And be careful not to push the sandpaper over and past the edge. Probably takes a little bit of practice. And you can feel it after you've sanded it. It's super, super smooth. Oops, okay. There's one spot I missed, so that's why you have a good feel. The other side. So if you've missed a spot, you'll feel it, and it's instant. These edges are slightly chamfered, so ever so slightly, and I mean with a really light touch. I just touch them with the sandpaper, so I don't sand through the edge. And it's really light. And that's it forever. It's nice and smooth, and it's ready for the final coat. The final coat is getting just a clear finish. For the second coat, I'm just using a clear varnish. And it's I'm putting it exactly on like I did with the very first coat of the pigmented varnish. One thing you'll find, this is a lot easier to use than the pigmented varnish. And the pigmented varnish is also probably trying to apply that is as hard as trying to apply the clear coats with stain in them. You really have to have some experience with brush. And I stacked them. I moved them and stacked them just like last time.